Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Tennis and Bagels podcast. And I'm joined by, as always, by my co-host here, Hall of Famer Steve Flink, author of Pete Sampras' Greatness Revisited. And we're doing our post-major chat as we do after every major. So, Steve, this was a very compelling major. How are you today?
Good, Vansh. I'm good. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think as much as you did. I know we did a little texting during the tournament, as we often do, and yeah, it was a very enjoyable fortnight for the men and the women.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to get your sort of big picture thoughts on Yannick Sinner because he's having a really stupendous year, 55 and 5 on the year. He's won two majors, and he won this one with dropping two sets along the way. And obviously there were some things he had to deal with mentally with everything going on away from the court with the positive drug tests and the players weighing in on it, and obviously him doing some interviews before the tournament started. How impressed were you by his ability to put all of that aside? And then what impressed you the most with his play on the court? Because I thought he played his best match in the final.
Oh, far and away, his best match was the final. Yeah, I was just impressed that I mean, what was this, 6, 7 days? It was immediately after Cincinnati that the news became public that he was, about the drug tests and the two positive tests and the whole explanation of taking points away from Indian Wells and prize money, but they were not holding him. They essentially accepted his story of what had happened with the physio, et cetera. So that was a lot to deal with because it had been going on. It went back to testing in Indian Wells in March. And because that was such a long time traveling around in his mind and wondering if they would suspend him or not and what was going to happen, finally the news breaks. In one sense, he's relieved, but then he's having everybody in the tennis world react, and the likes of Kyrgios and Shapovalov, they're kind of popping off, and perhaps unfairly. And I believe in the case of those two, they sort of, I don't think they were terribly interested in all the facts. And Kyrgios came out and said he should have gotten 2 years, which I thought was ludicrous, but Nick can behave that way. So in any case, he had to sort of digest all of that and then still get on with playing the tournament and he'd never really been in that kind of psychological situation before. So I think it was quite difficult. Maybe that's why he went down a set and a break in the first round against Mackenzie McDonald, and maybe he was still reeling from it. But I really did think that from there, round by round, even the rest of that match, that he settled down, and we saw a very good Sinner the whole tournament who peaked in the final against Taylor Fritz. But I was very impressed because it was very easy for any of us, I think, to put ourselves in his shoes and say, what would this be like, where your integrity is being questioned? And the main thing was, Vansh, that what they were questioning was the process and why, and many were perhaps comparing it to Maria Sharapova and Simona Halep. But to me, every case is different. It's really hard to say. I think a uniform policy, I don't know really how you do that. I think you have to judge each case on its own merits. And so I thought in some ways he was harshly judged by his peers and by the media, and it had to make him very uncomfortable. So given all of that, the fact that he could go out in the last major of the season under those circumstances and win the title and take his second major of the year and conduct himself with a lot of poise and professionalism, as he always does on the court, and also not whine about this. He accepted the questions in the pre-match press conference. He did it again after he won the title. He wasn't resentful of anybody asking him any question related to that testing, and I admired that too. There wasn't any defensiveness. So weighing all that, I was highly impressed. And yes, okay, you look back, should he beat Taylor Fritz in the finals? Yes. Should he beat Jack Draper in the semis? Yes. Was he the favorite against Medvedev in the quarters? Yes. But nonetheless, and Tommy, he had to deal with Tommy Paul in the 16s. I look at all that and I say, that's a job well done, because it would have been very easy to get distracted and try and have your mind wandering to what's going on with you off the court and where is this headed, and just have your head swirling. He didn't do that. So I think in the end, Vanch, he showed a lot of character, discipline, determination, professionalism. You can use any of those words, they describe Sinner. And to me, it was commendable what he did.
Yeah, you summarized the essence of his, the way he conducted himself on the court and sort of how that led to the performances on the court. But, what part of his game do you think really uh, shone through the most? Because obviously he's improved his movement a ton. He's serving impeccably well. He's obviously got the hard hitting ground strokes with plenty of margin on both sides. And we saw him, I think from the baseline, he must have made like 14 unforced errors total
Yeah,
off the ground in the final,
yeah,
which really impressed me, and also the comeback in the third set when he won 4 games in a row to close it off.
yeah.
And
No,
I was also impressed with the Tommy Paul match, the tie breaks, because he's now won 14 of his last 15 tie breaks, and I feel like in the tie breaks he ends up, going for more in some ways, and he still is able to limit the unforced errors.
yeah, well, the Tommy Paul. Let's start with that. I mean, there was 3-all in the first set tiebreak. He broke free from there. Played 4 really good points in the second set tiebreak. He's serving at 4-5. He came up with a couple of really good second serves much to get himself out of that jam. He loses either point, he's probably going to lose the set, and he won them both and then tucked it away. So I thought that was very good. And yeah, he's been great in the tiebreaks. That's no accident. We always laud Novak for his tremendous tiebreak record, and Sinner now it seems to be following along those lines, and that's a sign of a player that can perform well under pressure. And as far to then, of course, at the Medvedev match was a bit strange. I didn't really fully understand the first 3 sets. So that Sinner played a really good first set, which he won 6-2. Then we had a pair of 6-1 sets going in both directions, first for Medvedev, then for Sinner, and he finished it off 6-4 in the fourth. But I thought that was an uneven match. They both played a good fourth set. It's the only time that simultaneously they were performing well. Otherwise, it was one-sided. But still, you can't fault him much. And Medvedev did play an extraordinary second set, in my view. I didn't think Sinner went that far off. I thought Medvedev played exceptionally well in the second set to win it so decisively. So you weigh all that, and then Jack Draper match, that was uncomfortable, I thought. I mean, obviously he knew at some point in the second set that Jack was having issues and getting sick on the court, etc. But I also felt he was uncomfortable in the baseline rallies. At Draper's ball, it was bothering Sinner. The heaviness of the forehand, the solidness of the backhand. He didn't get into much of a groove in that match, I thought. But he once again, with the big points and the second set tiebreak, he was not found wanting because he had the break in the first set in that one, and Draper broke back for 4-all, and then there's a long game on Draper's serve, and Sinner finally breaks and serves out the first set, and then second set squandered, I think, 4 break points across 3 different service games. He's knocking on the door, he can't get the break, but he wins the breaker, and then finally pretty clean in the third. I didn't think he was terribly happy with his performance in that match for a lot of reasons, and that's taking nothing away from Draper, who I think has a great future. But then in the final, all of that was sort of cast aside in his mind. I thought in the final, and maybe it's partially that the way Taylor Fritz plays with the relatively flat strokes, it's a nice fit for Sinner. I think he likes that kind of tennis. And you mentioned the 14 unforced, and he was hitting the ball really cleanly. I thought he was hitting out pretty freely, too. That's what impressed me about so few errors. I really felt like he was getting a lot of sting on the ball, that good pace. That he was not holding back. They could very easily have made 20 to 25 unforced errors if he had not been that sharp, but he was. Timing was impeccable and hitting the ball really well up both sides, digging balls out of the corner, when stretched on his backhand. There were so many things he did well in that match. And then, he had some bad serving spells. At one stage, he missed 16 out of 24 first serves, but overall, when he had to, I thought the serve was there for him. And then the returning was great. And, he broke Fritz 3 times in the first set and got a break at the end of the second set to seal that. And then those 2 breaks at the end, as you already mentioned, he was 5-3 down. And I thought Fritz was going to get that set. I thought Taylor got so inspired in the middle of the third to save a couple of break points to get to 3-all and then break and then hold again. And now 2 games later, he serves with the set, gets within 2 points of it, but Sinner got the clutch break there and then one more at the end. So I felt like it was a really first-rate final from him. Nothing to be ashamed of for Taylor. It just was the very best Sinner. And I think on this day, there are very few guys that could have beaten him because he felt, again, he liked the matchup. He liked the fact that it was a final. He was ready for the occasion. So I came away really quite. I was quite impressed with the way he conducted himself and the way he played at the end. And those are all those matches. I mean, look, it was a good performance against Tommy Paul, but he was down 2 breaks in the first set. I didn't think he played a great first set, but boy, did he put on a spree there from 1-4 to 5-4, almost won the set there before Tommy served an ace. And then, you know, again, comes through in the tiebreak, comes through again in the second set tiebreak, and comes away with a straight set win. So I just think overall, if you look at how he played match to match, it's hard to crawl with it. Never, you know, not feeling like he was peaking until the final, but sometimes that's the best way to do it. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you're better off to save your best for last as long as you're playing well enough along the way, which he was, and he wasn't taking too much out of himself. So I would say it was a very nice follow-up to what he did in Australia at the start of the year, to get his second major, to prove his supremacy on hard courts, and to put himself in a position, Vansh, where it's really hard to imagine that he doesn't, with very little to achieve from here before the end of the year. He just has to play okay to end the year number 1. And that's a nice feeling because, you know, there's no pressure. Novak last year at the end of the year did have a certain amount of pressure because he was trying to pass Carlos. And there were, you know, I mean, he felt like he kind of had to win Paris, which he did, and then he ended up winning Turin, and he got that number 1 ranking. But there was pressure on him to achieve that. Sinner is not going to have that. So I think for the first time in his career, he's going to finish a year at number 1 on the heels of 2 majors, 6 titles. I mean, it's a terrific season for him. I do expect him to win probably at least 1 more title before the year's up, maybe a couple. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like last year, he was terrific indoors. He went 20-2 at the end of the U.S. Open. And he still, you know, can actually go up in the rankings because he lost early in Shanghai and he had to withdraw from Paris. So I kind of feel like indoors really suits him to the ground. And like you said, you know, lack of pressure for year end number 1. I think he should have a really strong finish to the end of the season. And it'll be interesting to see how Djokovic and Alcaraz sort of follow up their, you know, U.S. Open early exits. And, you know, since they don't really have to worry about, in Carlos's case, it's very unlikely he's going to catch Jannik in that department. So,
oh yeah, I think so. And look, he's in the race. He's actually slightly behind Zverev.
Yeah.
So I think he'll probably pass Zverev. Although the thing about Sasha is he does keep winning a lot of matches, and he'll probably do well. He'll probably play a fair amount by the end of the year. So you never know. But I don't see. I just don't see either one of those guys catching Jannik because he just needs to add some, you know, do moderately well in these last, and he could do virtually nothing before Paris, and then have a good Paris and Turin and lock it up. So he's got a lot of options. He should feel good about where he is and not have to tax himself too much because, like the other guys, he wants to end the year strong, but he's also thinking about the start of next year and going back to Australia and trying to defend his title. And that's a big priority, I think, to him. And it's nice. It has to be a good feeling that he doesn't have to physically exhaust himself during the autumn, and he can play what he wants to play. And that's going to help. It's going to help him get off to a good start next year. And then hopefully, too, he can be gradually putting this whole episode behind him and sort of changing the narrative is the way I would put it, so that people are talking again, you know, solely about his tennis, and that's the way he's going to want to do it. I'm sure I'm sure he's just about where he wants to be now, Vansh.
Yeah, totally. I guess, you know, since we referred to Carlos, you know, he had the early exit to Bodek in the second round. What were your thoughts on kind of him in general, North American swing, you know, after losing that tough final to Djokovic in many ways? I thought that was the match of the year so far in terms of really big matches, really high quality from both players in the Olympic final. And for Alcaraz having the hangover post-Olympics, not really feeling like mentally he had the same kind of energy. He seemed fried on the court, you know, just didn't seem like himself at all since he played Monfils in Cincinnati. So, you know, what were your thoughts on that, especially also that he lost in straights, you know, given that in 3 out of 5, you'd figured maybe he'd be able to sneak a set here.
Yeah, I feel like you're talking about we can talk about Novak in a minute, but each of them had reasons to be let down and depleted when they came into the Open, because they both put a lot of effort into the Olympics. Novak came away with the great reward. Carlos didn't. As you said, it was an exceedingly high quality final, maybe the best match of the year. But for Carlos, that was no consolation. To play well and not win was, I think, really disappointing to him, and exactly the opposite for Novak. But neither one had any time to really recover emotionally. You can do it physically, but this was like throwing an extra major into the middle of the summer. It's not a Grand Slam event, but it's awfully close. And for Djokovic, obviously, it was that one elusive prize that he hadn't won. And Carlos knows you have to wait another 4 years, so he was probably disconcerted about that. So he goes, I think, in Carlos's case, going to Cincinnati may have been a mistake. He smashed his racket 4 times on the court, very much unlike him in the Monfils match, and said it was the worst he'd ever played. I don't know if it was really the worst he ever played, but it shows you what state of mind he was in, because that was a very fast court. So Monfils was able to kind of serve his way, use his big serve to greater advantage than he would just about anywhere else. And that was part of the problem, was just trying to get those breaks against Monfils. But again, I would have thought that might have helped Carlos in some ways, that it was early and that he had a little time to prepare for New York, and didn't play great in the first round, and then he loses to the big Dutchman in the second. As you said, it was 1-5 and 4, and so it was straight sets, never close in the first. Broke back in the second. You thought he might get to a tiebreak, but he didn't. Broke back in the third. He was smiling. It was like he thought maybe he was going to make his move, and he had a terrible night. I think broken 6 times. He just didn't serve well in that match at all. If he had, he could have gotten away with some of the erratic play off the ground, because he wasn't good from the baseline either. He didn't seem to have a night. He was being pushed around too much, and then he started to press. And I feel like, I guess things just unraveled a bit in his mind. And he talked about how he kind of alluded to lack of mental toughness, that he wasn't mentally on his game, which I agree had a lot to do with the physical part. So in his case, I think, Vansh, he should not kill himself in the fall. He shouldn't be terribly worried about whether he ends the year at 2 or 3. Whatever it is, he's got 2 slam titles for the season. Nothing to be ashamed of, and he can be proud of his achievements. But he too, as much as Novak and Jannik want to peak again in Australia. Sinner looking for that, defending his title, Novak hoping for an 11th. Carlos has never won that Australian. That's the only missing slam for him. So I think he'll be very eager to be fresh for that one, fresh and enthusiastic and well prepared, but not overplayed. And so I'm not expecting too much from him. The Novak, I don't know what to expect. He's going to play a little Davis Cup now, and that's good. And we'll see. I gather he's playing Shanghai. He's got a commitment, and then I suspect he'll wait till Paris and hope to use Paris results to squeeze into Turin if he can. And if he doesn't make it, he won't be heartbroken. Although if that's the case, his ranking is going to be dipping down pretty low to 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there if he's not careful. But again, I think he needs something of a break. He can't play too much in the fall, but it's going to be interesting because, neither one has a great incentive to do that much this fall. What do you expect from Djokovic in the next couple of months?
I'm expecting him to play kind of sparingly. Like you said, I think he's going to play in Shanghai. I think he'll probably do Shanghai, Paris, and then that'll be probably it. And then he'll try his best to get into Turin, where I think really suits him. He won this title now 2 years in a row in Turin. Those really, really fast courts. I still can't erase in my mind, how sort of vintage tennis he played against Sinner and Alcaraz back to back in the semis and the final.
Yeah. Oh no, that was spectacular. That was spectacular. He crushed them both in straight sets. I don't think either one of them got beyond 6-3 in a set. That was a great way to end that tournament, having lost to Sinner in a very close round robin match. You're right. Those conditions suit him well. He played there. He played great in 22 and 23, but I think he really wanted it badly both times, because in 22 he hadn't been able to come to the U.S. Open, and he had won Wimbledon and he wanted to finish the year on a high note, which he did. And last year it was all part of, he was kind of very mixed emotions because he got the #1 ranking sealed up by beating Holger Rune in the round robin. And then he kind of, it wasn't terribly good against Sinner. He played okay against Sinner in the round robin, but not his best. Then had to come back, beat Hurkacz to make sure that he got to the semis. And then, as you say, he really dismissed Alcaraz and Sinner back to back. So I agree. If he can get in there, he'll be very dangerous and eager and confident. But, he could use a decent Shanghai and a decent Paris. He's going to need some good points to guarantee making it into Turin. I'm curious to just see how eager he is, what that all means to him and what his thinking is. And but I mean, I don't think he wants that ranking to dip too low. And I do think out of pride, he'd like to at least be in the field at Turin and give himself a chance.
Yeah, for sure. And then, what are your thoughts on Alcaraz and Sinner winning 2 majors each this year? Because this is the first time since 2002 that none of the big three have won a major. So, does this kind of signal a changing of the guard in many ways? Because although Novak
it does. I think it does because, look, I mean, my feeling, the one thing I would tack on to the Novak assessment is I really think the only thing left, okay, maybe what he's really thinking is let me go back to let me just give 2025 everything I have and with the purpose of at least getting number 25. Anything beyond that would be a bonus, but if he can get that one more major and pass Margaret Court, I think he'd be completely content with what he's done in his career and ready to leave the game at the end of next year. And that's kind of the scenario I see, that somewhere along the line, Australia, Roland Garros, Wimbledon, somewhere along that line of majors before the U.S. Open, he grabs one. That's that's what I suspect will happen. Maybe he plays out the year. But yes, to get back to your point, and that would be a wonderful personal achievement for him, and he'd be going out on his terms. But the other 2 guys, it's no accident that they split those 4. I guess coming into the year, we might have expected Novak's going to at least win 1, but it didn't happen for him. And therefore, if it wasn't going to happen for him, these were the 2 guys ready to step up. Carlos had already done it. We knew he had 2 majors already. He had the U.S. Open in 2022 and Wimbledon in 23, but he comes in and wins Roland Garros and Wimbledon back-to-back, which was a tremendous achievement for him. And then Sinner starts and ends the year with hardcourt majors in Melbourne and New York. I think it's very fitting because I think we're going to see some years like that. In other words, my guess is they probably, between them next year, win 3 of the 4 with Novak getting the other 1. And then Novak likely retires, and they could have a bunch of years where they're dividing the majors. What I like about it, Vansh, is it was starting to look, I mean, they've each had stretches of difficulty. The Carlos had that tough stretch from losing to Novak in the final of Cincinnati summer of 2023, having won Wimbledon, and then that sent him into kind of a losing pattern all the way to Indian Wells this year. And then he picked it up again, and that was a great stretch from Roland Garros to Wimbledon. And, so that's when he was really playing great. By that time, Sinner, who had won Australia and who finished last year so strong, was having his struggles, of which we can maybe better understand now, given what was going on off the court. And so my hope now is that we're going to start seeing both of them playing great at the same time and therefore meeting, hopefully, in finals. I mean, I'd rather see them meet in the finals than quarters than the semis. And, yeah, I mean, it's come down to the fact that Sinner played his best at the end of last year and early this year when Carlos was not playing his best. Carlos played his greatest tennis through that Roland Garros Wimbledon period when Sinner was a bit off. Even though they did have a 5-setter in Roland Garros, I never thought that was the best Sinner, and Alcaraz came from 2 sets to 1 down and won it. I want to see it now where they're both kind of peaking simultaneously, because I think we could start to get matches like the U.S. Open in 2022, that epic 5-setter when Carlos rallied from match point down to win in 5 sets. So, yeah, it's not a shock when you pose the question about them splitting the 4. And as I say, I think there's going to be more of that. I got to look at the next 5 years or maybe beyond, figuring that they may kind of take over from the big 3 in the sense of dominance at the majors. It wouldn't shock me because I just have too many doubts about Medvedev, Zverev, all the other guys, about their ability to kind of stop these guys. I mean, I could see, we've seen Sasha has had a couple of wins at majors over Carlos, including the Australian this year, but is he good enough to beat them both back to back? I'm not sure. Medvedev hasn't won a tournament since Rome of 2023. So I look at these two guys and say it's really only Novak for the short term that's the real threat, and that should be able to grab a major somewhere along the line there. But these two guys can keep going a long time and be kind of ruling the sport, in my view. I mean, we may feel differently 3-4 years from now. Somebody may have emerged. Maybe Draper is really dangerous by then. But I see these two guys being really central forces in the game. Do you look at it that way?
Yeah, my feeling is I'd be surprised if someone other than those three got a slam next year. But you mentioned Medvedev and Zverev, and I guess that takes me back to the quarterfinal because, Steve, in my mind, once Djokovic and Alcaraz had left, to me, this was almost a de facto final in some ways, that quarterfinal, because I felt like whoever emerged as the victor in that one was most likely going to win the title. And so I was expecting, like the 5-setter they had at Wimbledon, the 5-setter they had at the Australian Open. I was expecting a really tight match with, both playing better at the same time for longer stretches. And it turned out to frankly be more or less a dud, apart from a few games where they were both playing well at the same time in the fourth set. And I was pretty sort of disappointed with Medvedev's level at the start of the third when he had all the momentum and he won the second set. And, he has the break point in the fourth set. He misses the volley, albeit it was a tough volley, but still,
Yeah.
I think a good volleyer would have made it. And then, I thought we were building to something in the fourth, but it didn't quite happen. And I just don't know where Medvedev goes from here because it's been, like you said, I mean, almost 18 months now since Rome of last year that he's won a title. And
Yeah.
I just...
No, it's worrisome. It's worrisome, Vanch. And I agree with your assessment completely because Medvedev, having been pretty much crushed by Sinner in the first set, played an excellent second set. My thought at the end of the second was, okay, now we're going to settle down and we're going to get a really close third set. I thought they both, and suddenly Medvedev missed, he played one bad game, I thought, early in the third on his serve, and then it was gone. I just was very surprised by that because he'd worked hard to get back in it and win the second. And then, as you said, then there was the missed volley that would have given him 4-2 in the fourth. And next game, he gets broken, and that was pretty much the match. So, yeah, I thought it was the most disappointing match of the tournament. It wasn't a terrible match. There was a lot of good tennis. Sinner played 3 really good sets out of the 4, but Medvedev did not keep up his end of the bargain. And I know it was tough to have to play Sinner in the quarters. I get it. But you have to deal with that. And I thought Medvedev's attitude, and maybe it was his attitude going in, Vanch, but I thought his attitude was going to be, look, this is not easy to play Yannick here, but if I can get through this, I'm going to treat this like a final, because if I could get through it, I have a really good chance to win this tournament. He should have liked his chances against anybody remaining in the field, and that could have been quite an incentive, and perhaps it was, but he just didn't produce. And I worry about him because I think there are a lot of other guys out there that are dangerous for him. I shouldn't say a lot of guys. There's a bunch of guys. And therefore, a de Minaur, I think the Draper is going to become dangerous for Medvedev when they start to play more. And yeah, I mean, we're not going to see him disappear from the top 10. He's probably going to hang in this period, probably in that range of 4, 5, 6, 7, and get deep into some tournaments. But boy, I mean, this is not what we expected from him. And he had that kind of semi-resurgence to get to the final of the U.S. Open last year, lose to Djokovic, beating Alcaraz. Starts this year with the final in Australia and is 1 set away against Sinner, but from 2 sets to love up, he can't do it. And this year has just not played out well. It's not unfolded well for him. So, yeah, it's a worry. And I must say I'm not that much more optimistic when it comes to Zverev. Are you?
No, not really. I mean, I thought that he would get the better of Fritz at that quarterfinal, especially because he had lost to him at Wimbledon. I wasn't expecting Fritz to beat him in back-to-back majors. I thought Zverev had a good chance to win the third set when he had won the second, and he had a break point at 4-all, missed an easy backhand. I was surprised by how many neutral backhands he was missing from the baseline. I thought, Fritz, he always plays him pretty tough. He has a good head-to-head against him. He was, returning well, serving well. Like he played a really good match, but I just But yeah, that's definitely a match that you would have expected. You would have expected Zverev to play better than he did, and he didn't quite meet the moment. So
Well, you pretty much echo my thoughts. I thought going in, look, Taylor's terrific, and Taylor is one of the game's true professionals.
yeah, he had a
And
very
he,
tough draw as well to the final to beat Ruud and Berrettini before Zverev
yeah, oh yeah,
it was an impressive run.
it was. But where I agreed with you is I thought, okay, Sasha knows he had a 2-set lead against Fritz in the center court of Wimbledon. It got away. Taylor played beautifully, but Sasha had a little bit injured in that match. So I thought, okay, not that it was going to be easy, but I thought he'd find a way because at this point he also knows that Novak's gone, that Carlos is gone, so that if he can, maybe he has to just get through Sinner in the final if he can get there. So it's another kind of slightly disappointing performance from him because we keep kind of thinking, all right, this might be the one. And certainly Roland Garros was a really golden opportunity to be up 2-1 in the final against Carlos, and then he got pretty much crushed the last two. He didn't play a good fourth, and he kind of let Carlos race out to a 4-love lead, and then he got broken early in the fifth, and it was not a good effort the last two sets. But you still thought, okay, he can compete for any major. He can play on it. He can play on anything. Grass so far has maybe been his most vulnerable in some ways, but he still plays really well on it, and he's great on the clay. He's great on the hard. So you keep thinking one of these majors just might be it, but I'm not thinking so much that way anymore. Mm-hmm. Taylor did achieve the 2 straight wins over him at the majors, and I don't know where it goes. You know, it's so strange because with some good results, he might even end the year number 2 in the world, but he won't be, to me, a very worthy number 2 in the world because we know that Sinner and Alcaraz are the 2 best players this year. And I don't know what kind of questions he's asking himself, Vansh. That's what worries me. Is he doing the soul searching and saying, this is what I got to do to turn this around? Because the goal should not be to I'll win more matches than anybody else, or I'll be as consistent as possible, or to be proud of number 2 on this basis when he has not, when the best he's done is a French final, but he doesn't have any majors in his collection. So I don't know deep down what his priorities really are. He says a lot of the right things, but the way he reacts on the court sometimes he'll kind of look up at his father. He did this in Cincinnati when he lost to Sinner in a really tight, well-played semifinal. He did it again at the Open in the Fritz match, and he looks up like, how could I miss that, or what am I doing? Particularly, by the way, on some of the errors off the back end. As you mentioned, he made a couple of crucial errors off this two-hander in this Fritz match. And I think he should have won the third because he got himself down quickly after winning the second, down 3-11. He had it back on serve, and then he had that chance to go up the break. Still had that chance if he plays a good breaker, but he didn't really play either breaker very well, the first set or the fourth, and Fritz did. That was, in the end, the difference. So I'm concerned about him, concerned about Medvedev. I don't know where things are going with Casper Ruud, but I don't expect to see him. And frankly, I'd be surprised to see him ever in a Grand Slam final again. Quarters and semis, maybe. Yeah. And he's a first-rate player, but I don't think we're going to see him in the same positions he was. So, yeah, that's kind of the state of the game. Draper is the interesting one to me in terms of the next few years, to see where he goes. If this was a big step in the semis. I love the Draper serve. I feel like Draper's serve is really kind of a nightmare in that ad court for any of these right-handed players. And it was for Sinner. I was amazed that Sinner, who knew that slice wide was coming, could do nothing about it. And I say that in praise of Draper more than critiquing Jannik, because I thought it was so effective. It's got so much work on it. It breaks so wide that you can know it's coming and still not be able to get it back. And I think his ground game is improving. I love the forehand now with all that heavy spin, which really kind of that's what I thought made Sinner the most uncomfortable. The ball bounding up high all the time and deep enough that you're playing too many balls above your shoulders. And I feel like Draper is getting there. I mean, I expect a very big year out of him in 2025. And when I say that, a push for the top 5. Maybe doesn't quite get there, but I see him pushing, and actually, I think he's got a decent chance with some decent first half results that he can break in there in the summer. Uh, that's my guess. I am kind of optimistic about him, but the other two guys, not so much. And it's kind of a shame when you think about it that Medvedev is still stuck on one, the 2021 U.S. Open, and that Sasha has got it only two finals to show for his extraordinary talent and ability. So that was, to me, those are two of the big storylines coming out of the Open. The fact that neither one of them got what they wanted out of it, and that they both fell short of their expectations again.
Yeah, speaking of Jack Draper, I like that you mentioned the forehand because I've always thought, he has a very potent backhand, the way he can, just drive it and it stays so low. And, we saw it on the grass when he beat Carlos,
Right.
he won that title, and he beat Berrettini in the final in Stuttgart. And
Yeah.
we've seen like, his peak level, and it's pretty high. But I was a little conflicted about his run because I felt like, obviously the draw opened up for him with Carlos losing. And, I didn't feel like his opponents played their best tennis in most of their matches up until the semis. But I was very impressed by the second set he played against Sinner because he was really struggling, physically with nausea and, vomiting like we saw on the court. But he still gave a really, really good account of himself. And you leave that match feeling like he can build on it. I worry a little bit about the physical issues, but I think in best of five, but I feel like that's something that, with more experiences like this, he can definitely build on it, and top 10 for sure. I think for Jack.
Yeah, no, top 10 for sure, but I think he's going to start making a move to the top five. I agree. The physical issues are there, but you could be getting sick on the court like that and still getting Sinner into a second set tiebreak, given how he was feeling. That showed a lot of determination and a certain courage, I thought, too, is that he kept fighting hard, and he got himself into a breaker, and that was it for him. But okay, for a first semifinal, that was a pretty respectable effort.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great against de Minaur. He just really picked him apart. And I know it was Alex's first. Alex is coming back after the mishap at Wimbledon, having to default to Djokovic there, but still, it still impressed me how methodically he took him apart. And so I feel like I'm pretty high on him right now, and I'm much more impressed with his ground game than I was a year ago, and then I've become increasingly impressed by his serve, because I just feel like he's going to become very quick. He might end up being tougher to break than even Shelton, who's a bigger server, but Ben, I feel like perhaps Draper is a craftier server.
Yeah, it's a good assessment of his game. So, this about does it for part one of this show, and we'll be back very soon with part two. We'll talk about Taylor Fritz, we'll talk about the women's side a little bit, and we'll see you guys soon.